After 12 years, we're letting you go. Your position is no longer needed, my boss said, looking straight through me like I wasn't even there. No warning, no thank you. Just like that, I was done. My name is Theodore. I'm 45 years old, and until this morning, I was the Director of Infrastructure and Security at Hartley Dynamics. Not just a tech guy. I built the backbone of everything that kept this company running. From small office routers to global cloud systems, my signature was on every blueprint. When fires broke out, I put them out. When systems crashed, I brought them back. Quietly, efficiently, without ever asking for credit. So when I walked into that office and saw Melissa from HR already there, I didn't need an explanation. I could read the room better than I could read a code base, and that's saying something. I didn't argue, didn't ask questions. I just nodded once, stood up, and walked out. Calm, controlled, but inside, something was shifting. Back at my office, I packed my things while junior analysts looked on, eyes wide and confused. Some of them I had trained myself, good kids. But they didn't know what I knew. The architecture I'd built wasn't something you could Google. There were things buried deep, custom frameworks, hidden redundancies, quiet safeguards, things that only I had mapped, things they had all taken for granted. As I left the building for the last time, I glanced back at the logo above the glass doors. Hartley Dynamics had just made the worst mistake of its life. They thought getting rid of me would be the end of it. But what they didn't know was that it was only the beginning. The engine purred as I sat in my car across the street from the building that had, for more than a decade, been my second home. 12 years of my life inside those walls, now erased with a sentence. Most people would have driven off, gone home, licked their wounds. But I didn't move. Not yet. Because here's the thing about infrastructure. When you build it from the ground up, you know what happens when you remove the wrong piece. You know where the cracks will form. You know what systems will fail. And more importantly, what secrets will be exposed. They thought firing me would make a problem go away. That removing me would wipe the slate clean. But they misunderstood something very basic. I was the slate. For years, I was the one who covered for bad decisions, who patched things quietly when leadership took shortcuts. I never raised my voice, never caused a stir, because I believed in the mission. I believed in building something real. But somewhere along the line, the mission changed. The people at the top weren't building anymore. They were scheming, quietly, carefully, counting on everyone else being too distracted to notice. But I noticed. I noticed 6 months ago when access logs stopped adding up, when systems I used every day suddenly gave me permission denied. I noticed when purchase orders went through under ghost vendor names, names I didn't recognize, even though I reviewed every vendor application myself. I noticed when the finance department's traffic spiked late at night, long after the accountants had gone home. I didn't say anything at the time. I just watched, logged, tracked. Because that's what you do when you've been responsible for every layer of a system, from hardware to firewalls to compliance. You notice changes, you watch patterns, and most of all, you wait. Because the truth doesn't disappear. It just waits for the right moment to be seen. And now, with me out of the building, I knew exactly what they were counting on. They assumed I'd go home, maybe send an angry email or post something on social media. something they could laugh about in a meeting and brush off as bitterness. But I didn't feel bitter. What I felt was clear. They didn't just fire an employee. They pulled the thread that held their fragile little system together. And once that thread unraveled, the whole thing, the lies, the fake invoices, the misused credentials, it wouldn't just fall apart. It would explode. I started the car and pulled into traffic, not because I had somewhere to be, but because movement helps me think. And I was thinking now. Hard. Planning. Running through timelines, systems, backups. I had files. I had logs. I had proof of things no one outside of the company had ever seen. Emails that weren't meant for my eyes. But I had built the systems that sent them. I had the keys. They forgot that. They thought I'd fade away quietly. But they had no idea what I was carrying with me when I walked out that door. They had no idea what I'd seen, what I'd stored, what I was prepared to do if they pushed me. And now, they had pushed me. And once you push someone like me, someone who knows where everything is buried, you don't get to control what happens next. 12 years ago, when I first joined Hartley Dynamics, we were just a name on a list of mid-sized firms trying to find their place in a changing world. Back then, our entire server room fit inside what used to be a storage closet. Nothing was automated. Nothing was secure. The coffee machine had more memory than our local drives. But even then, I saw potential. Not in the company, not yet, but in what it could become. I didn't take the job for the money. In fact, I took a pay cut from my last role. What I wanted was a clean slate, a place I could build something from the ground up. No red tape, no politics, just systems, structure, and the space to make it right. And for a while, that's exactly what it was. I rewired our networks, rebuilt our databases, and streamlined our entire operations layer by layer. I worked weekends, skipped holidays, and stayed long after the lights were off, not because anyone asked me to, but because the job asked me to. There's a difference. When things broke, I fixed them. When vendors failed, I built our own tools. And when a junior dev accidentally wiped out half of our billing archive at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, it was me who drove in, unshaven and exhausted, and restored it from a backup no one even knew existed. I didn't do it for praise. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because I believed that if I took care of the foundation, others could build something meaningful on top of it. And they did, at first. I watched the company grow. I watched new departments pop up, new executives slide into polished chairs on the top floor. I saw projects get funded and clients sign long-term contracts because our systems never failed, because people trusted what we built. But the more the company expanded, the less anyone seemed to care about how it all worked. Suddenly, we weren't people. We were IT resources. We were figures on a spreadsheet. The questions changed from, how can we make this better, to, why are we spending so much? Efficiency became the only language the top floor understood. Cut this, reduce that, simplify, automate, outsource. At first, I tried to explain. I walked through the architecture. I showed the risks, the interdependencies, the way one careless update could cause cascading failures, but they didn't listen. I'd sit in meetings while executives nodded and smiled, then do the opposite of everything I recommended. I was no longer the person they came to for answers. I was the obstacle standing between them and a cheaper contract. Still, I kept showing up, kept documenting, protecting, defending. I told myself it was just a phase. That leadership always comes and goes, but the real work continues. But then came the new hires, not in my department, above it. People in sharp suits and even sharper smiles. They spoke in buzzwords, always talking about cloud transformation and agile synergy, phrases that meant nothing but sounded like progress. One of them, Ethan Barrett, was brought in as the new head of technology strategy. On paper, I was still above him, but everyone knew what was happening. He came from a consulting firm we had never worked with before. He took over meetings I was supposed to lead. And when he asked to review my access privileges, I knew exactly what that meant. They were boxing me out. Slowly, quietly, I started getting locked out of systems I had built myself. My project assignments shrank. My team was rerouted through Barrett's office. I wasn't even told about major updates until after they happened. At first, I tried to brush it off. Office politics, turf wars. It happens. But then I noticed the money, a line in a quarterly report that didn't match the vendor list, a contract signed without going through procurement, a sudden increase in consulting expenses routed through departments that had no history of hiring outside help. I could have raised my hand, could have walked into someone's office and asked, but I didn't, because by then, I knew better. I just started taking notes. I stayed quiet, smiled in meetings, did what was asked. But every time something looked off, I tracked it. Every invoice, every login, every change to our system permissions. I didn't know what it all meant yet, but I knew enough to recognize the shape of a lie. And somewhere behind it all, I knew one truth more clearly than anything else. They weren't just trying to replace me. They were trying to erase me. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger clouds judgment, makes people reckless. I was something else. Sharper, quieter, focused. You don't spend over a decade managing sensitive systems without learning patience. If someone's trying to bury you, the first thing you do is stop digging. Let them make the next move. Let them believe you're too distracted or too outdated to see what's right in front of you. That's exactly what I did. I let Ethan take over more of my projects. Let leadership pretend I wasn't in the room during meetings. I even started coming in late on purpose, just to see who noticed. No one ever did. That's when I knew I was invisible. And that meant I was free. The changes started small. An approval I didn't remember signing. A vendor ID with no invoice history. A budget adjustment in a department that didn't even have an active project. All small things. Noise, really, if you weren't looking. But I was. I'd built those dashboards. I knew the normal rhythms. And this wasn't normal. So I started logging everything. From a separate laptop at home, one never linked to the company, I began creating my own little archive. Secure. Offline. Untouchable. At first, it was just receipts, time-stamped logs, backup schedules. But soon, it grew. Email headers, meeting notes, network traffic summaries. Anything that seemed even slightly off went into the vault. And then came the name Montera Solutions. It showed up during a routine check of the access controls, the kind of maintenance task no one bothered with anymore because they assumed everything ran on autopilot. But I still checked. Always did. A string of approvals had been pushed through the finance system under Montera's name. Consulting fees, licensing upgrades, cloud optimization services. Each invoice looked perfectly ordinary on the surface. until I checked the sender domain. It wasn't a secure vendor address. It was a Gmail alias. Unusual, but not illegal. Still, it raised a flag. So I dug deeper. The company had been registered just over a year ago. The address was a shared office box in Raleigh. No website, no phone number, just a paper trail that looked more like a shell than a business. And yet, Hartley Dynamics had paid Montera over $700,000 in the last 11 months. Quietly, in clean, staggered payments, just under the thresholds that would trigger automatic audits. That's when the anger finally came. Not because I'd found the truth, but because of how lazy it all was. The carelessness, the assumption that no one would look, that no one could look. I remembered a meeting 6 months ago when Ethan had pitched his cost savings roadmap. I hadn't been invited, of course, but I watched the recording later through a system log I'd set up years ago for compliance. His entire pitch? Cut internal overhead. Outsource what we could. Pay specialized partners to streamline tech services. Montera was the partner. The signature on the approvals? Ethan's. And just like that, the game became visible. He hadn't come to modernize anything. He'd come to gut it. Quietly. Smoothly. Using the same systems I built to protect the company, to bleed it instead. And with me slowly pushed to the side, no one would notice until it was too late. But I noticed. And I wasn't done. I didn't report it. Not yet. I wasn't going to hand this over to the same people who had invited him in. I needed more. A full map. Evidence that couldn't be denied. That's when I started watching who else had access to the Montera pipeline. Finance logs showed multiple approvals. One of them from a name I hadn't expected, Cynthia Blake, our Vice President of Corporate Development. A person I'd barely spoken to in 12 years. Always polished, always polite, but never involved in anything technical. Until now, she'd signed off on at least 4 high-value payments, some as recent as last week, all routed through Ethan's department, all cleared without a second reviewer. I checked again, no mistake. That's when the second name hit, Liam Harrow, our CFO. Every transaction over $250,000 had passed through him. No questions asked. I cross-checked the dates. Every time I'd lost access to a system, a Montera invoice had been processed within 72 hours. It wasn't just Ethan freelancing. This was layered, approved, protected. I remember sitting in my home office that night, staring at the lines of data stretched across my monitor. It wasn't just fraud. It was coordinated. And I had been pushed out not because I was no longer useful, but because I was the only one who would have noticed. And I had. Now I just had to decide what to do about it. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear. Fear's a sharp thing, loud and hot. What I felt was quieter, heavy, the kind of weight that settles behind your ribs when you realize you're holding something no one else knows. Something that could break the surface and change everything. But truth, like code, has structure. You can't just dump it out and expect people to understand. You have to walk them through it. You have to make it impossible for them to ignore. So that's what I started doing. The next morning, I brewed coffee the way I always did. 3 scoops, slow pour. But instead of reaching for my usual work mug, I reached for the old black one. The one with the chip on the handle. The one I used back in year 1 at Hartley. Just a small thing. A ritual. A reminder. Then I opened my laptop. The machine was air-gapped, never connected to the internet. Built it myself. Encrypted drives. Two-factor BIOS lock. It booted in silence, blinking once before revealing a file structure that looked like nothing, unless you knew what you were looking for. Inside were folders labeled with dates, names, hashes. I didn't need to go back far. The last 3 months were enough. Each folder was its own case. Monterra invoices, system logs, access requests, approval chains, and one folder labeled simply ETHAN-chain. Inside were screen captures, time-stamped server logs, and a spreadsheet I'd been quietly building. It tracked every Monterra transaction alongside HR decisions, terminations, reassignments, department cuts. The pattern was clean. Someone got pushed out. And within days, a high-value payment slipped through finance with Ethan's name attached. I added 2 more entries that morning. Then I began writing. Not an email. Not yet. An outline. If I wanted this to stick, I couldn't just sound like a fired employee waving his arms. I needed to sound like a forensic auditor, someone with receipts, a calm voice in a storm, not screaming, just telling the weather. But I also needed time. Once the first domino fell, they'd come for me, hard, with lawyers, threats, silence, maybe worse, which meant I had to move before they even realized there was a board game on the table. At 10:17 a.m., I created a new email address, not a Gmail, a masked internal-looking domain, built to mimic our corporate structure, but housed entirely outside. I'd designed it months ago during a routine security training when I discovered the marketing team had bought dozens of unused domains for future branding campaigns. No one ever used them. No one ever monitored them. But I did. I logged into the account and began composing. The first message was short. A teaser. Subject: financial irregularities. Immediate review required. To Ethan Barrett. Body: Mr. Barrett. You may want to double-check payment chains involving Monterra Solutions, specifically invoices approved between March and July. There appear to be inconsistencies. T. I didn't sign my name. He wouldn't need it. I scheduled it to send at exactly 9:03 a.m. the next morning, 15 minutes before the weekly leadership call. Just enough time to rattle him. Then I created a second message, this time for Cynthia Blake, our VP. Hers was more detailed. I included a screenshot of her approval on a $210,000 Monterra invoice with a timestamp just 48 hours after she signed off on a departmental cost reduction strategy. I didn't accuse, just asked a question. Was this payment discussed with finance? If so, could you share the justification for the markup? Polite, neutral, but surgical. I timed hers for 9:45 a.m., right after the call. Enough time for her to wonder who else got a message. But the real one, the one I spent hours drafting, was for someone higher. Graham O'Connell, board member, semi-retired. Not active day-to-day, but still looped into financial reviews. Old school, known for reading the fine print. We'd only spoken twice in all my years there, both times during compliance audits. But I remembered one thing. He listened when no one else did. His message was longer. It included 6 attachments, clean file names, a brief summary, not a rant, a record, subject, Montera Solutions, internal risk summary, body. Mr. O'Connell, I realize you may not know me directly, but I'm reaching out as a concerned former executive at Hartley Dynamics. During my time overseeing infrastructure and security operations, I identified several patterns involving vendor activity, access changes, and financial approvals that may warrant review by the board. I've attached a high-level summary of these findings, along with supporting documentation. While I'm no longer with the company, I believe in what it used to stand for. And I hope that by sharing this, the right people can make informed decisions before things go any further. If you require clarification, I'm available for a private discussion. T. Reynolds. I set it to send at 7 a.m. sharp, time to land with his morning email sweep. Then I sat back, checked the logs again, closed the lid. Outside, the sun was fading behind a quiet blue sky. I stood up, stretched, and walked to the kitchen. My wife, Claire, was making dinner. She glanced over and said nothing, just gave me that look, the one that asked everything without saying a word. It's starting, I said quietly. She nodded once and returned to the stove, because she knew me. She knew I didn't start fights. I ended them, cleanly. The next morning arrived like any other, quiet, still, except I wasn't waiting for the clock. I was already at my desk when the first email was sent at 7 a.m. By 7:06, it had been opened. By 7:09, the attachments had been downloaded. And by 7:13, Graham O'Connell had forwarded the email to 2 other board members. That was all I needed to see. I refreshed the security log window one last time and saw the traffic spike at headquarters. Internal chatter was buzzing. Ethan's name, Montera, terms like audit chain, unusual vendor, and data discrepancy, all lighting up in real time, like sparks crawling up a fuse. I poured a fresh cup of coffee and waited. The message to Ethan went out at 9:03 exactly. At 9:06, he replied, not to me, of course, but to a handful of senior executives. The subject line, urgent, vendor audit discussion, Montera. Too late. The moment he hit send, the board had already seen the pattern. Cynthia's email went out not long after. She didn't respond, but her calendar, which I still had access to through a misconfigured API hook, suddenly filled with private meetings back to back. It was starting to unravel. At 10:12 a.m., I got a text from an old friend still inside. Security walked Ethan out of the building. CFO's office is locked. You weren't kidding. I wasn't. And still, I said nothing. By the time lunch rolled around, the whispers had turned to meetings, emergency sessions, conference rooms filling with lawyers and red faces. I knew that rhythm. The way an organization scrambles when it realizes someone's been pulling strings behind the curtain. And they've finally been caught mid-tug. At 3:37 p.m., I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring twice before answering. Theodore Reynolds? Yes. This is Angela Curran, interim chair of the Hartley Dynamics Board of Directors. I'd like to speak with you, formally, about the documents you sent Mr. O'Connell. I assumed you might. Would you be willing to meet? Number. But I'll answer your questions, all of them, on one condition. Silence on the line, then go on. You keep this clean. No buried memos. No quiet suspensions. If you want my help, you do this the right way. We intend to. I believed her, or at least believed that, for the moment, they didn't have a choice. By the next morning, the news was everywhere. Internal memo first, then the press release. Hartley Dynamics announces internal review, following financial irregularities. Several executives placed on leave pending investigation. Independent auditors engaged. Board review in process. The story broke wide. Local media first, then industry outlets. Montera Solutions was revealed as a shell company. Payments traced. Approvals linked. Ethan Barrett was nowhere to be found. Word was he'd left the state. The CFO. Quietly cooperating with investigators, hoping to cut a deal. And Cynthia? Gone. No statement. No denial. Just gone. I watched it all unfold from my back porch, sipping coffee in the cold March sun. No gloating. No calls to old coworkers. Just a steady, quiet peace. They had underestimated me. They thought I was just another system guy, another tired suit they could push out without a second thought. What they forgot was that I knew every wire, every gate, every weak point hidden beneath their polished spreadsheets and performance bonuses. And when they tried to cut me out, I didn't fight back. I just pulled the right thread and watched it all come apart. 2 weeks later, Angela called again, this time with an offer. The board has voted to create a new role, Chief Security Officer. Reports directly to the board. Unfiltered oversight. We want you in it. I didn't answer right away. I asked for the offer in writing. I asked for conditions. I asked for a list of every department I'd have authority to audit. And when she sent it all, I took 2 full days before I replied. When I finally walked back into the building, it wasn't as an employee. It was as a watchdog. Not to get even, I already had, but to make sure no one ever tried something like this again. Claire was waiting for me in the parking lot when I walked out that first evening. I climbed into the car, leaned back, and looked at her with a tired smile. Back to work? She asked. Not quite, I said. This time, I'm not fixing their problems. I'm preventing them. We drove home in silence, the sun sinking behind us, casting long shadows across the road. But this time, I wasn't in one of them. Not anymore.